Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. The ARC of California is thrilled to offer Caring Futures, a proven resource program dedicated to supporting caregivers and family members of adults with disabilities. Understanding the unique challenges faced by family caregivers as they age, Caring Futures offers critical planning assistance, resources, and a supportive community. Today we have Stephen Dale with us. And Stephen Dale, I am going to ask you to come on camera and introduce yourself.
Okay, well, let me start off with one of my favorite subjects, which is myself. You are talking to an attorney, so
Tell us a little bit about your background and what you would say if you were giving your own bio.
well, there we go. So, just to give a little background, my involvement with the disability community actually, and as I like to say, nobody usually volunteers to be part of our community. You're usually drafted in one way or another. I came from a family of institutional workers, actually at Agnew State Hospital. My family worked in the institutions for 3 generations here, which was pretty common. And actually, the first time one of my earliest memories was that I used to spend a lot of time following my father and grandfather around the units here at the hospital. I actually was kind of shocked to find out that not everybody worked in a state hospital as I got older and that kind of thing, and got started with that. That would be in the late 1950s and that kind of thing. I later became what's called a psychiatric technician. That's a specialized nurse that worked in the institutions. They still have psych techs around. By the time I did that, and I did that for 17 years, working in the institutions here, I had some good experiences and bad experiences. And by the way, anything I say, I'm not saying that we should go back to institutions. We certainly shouldn't. But, I actually experienced it. So for me, my family got involved in deinstitutionalization for mental health, which, by the way, turned out to be a disaster and is a cautionary tale, I think, in a lot of ways for the DD community. But anyway, got involved in that, worked as the president of the union at Sonoma Developmental Center during the Kofelt years, which for those of you that are advocates, that was a key situation. I finally left the institution here basically to become a civil rights lawyer. So I decided to go to law school with the objective of trying to shut down the institutions for, to find a better alternative, and worked at a magic place called the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund as an intern at a very magic time when the ADA was being passed and IDEA had already passed, and got to work with Ed Roberts, became one of his many proteges here. He really influenced my life. And I got involved in doing civil rights work at Dredif. And then I got involved in doing special needs trust work. And I've done this for the last 30 years here. And part of, Felisa, what I want to share is with this is not just what is a special needs trust, what does it do, and that kind of thing. But, part of this, when I got involved in doing this work, I had always said under no circumstance would I ever serve as a trustee of a special needs trust. But I helped to establish a group called the Golden State Pool Trust. And for one reason or another, we had to replace the trustee here. And under California law, a practicing attorney can be the trustee of a pooled trust. So now I have 230 beneficiaries that I actually serve with some wonderful staff that work with folks. So I've been heavily involved in the administration of the trust. So part of what I want to bring today and share with folks is not just what is a special needs trust, what does it do, and that kind of thing, but it's more the practical part of planning. Because I will tell you, I see a lot of folks put plans together that are fine until the trust matures, and that's usually, which means you've passed away. In our office, nobody dies. When the parent passes away, we call it the trust matures, whatever you want to call it. But, when it's time for the trust to actually kick in, we want to make sure that everything works properly. So part of what I want to share is my experience over 30 years about what works, what doesn't work, and big surprise, the choice of trustee or the management system is the single greatest issue about whether these things are going to work or not. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. And that is the short bio.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you giving us such a thorough background of what led you to this place today.
I will mention one other thing real quick before we jump in.
Sure.
I am on the board of the ARC of California. I love the ARC of California. And the reason that I'm on the board of the ARC of California is it's the most effective advocacy organization for persons with developmental disabilities. And it definitely has an impact on everybody that has a loved one with developmental disabilities. So it doesn't surprise me that a program like this would be done under the banner of the ARC of California.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So most of our viewers here today have probably heard of a special needs trust, but I'm sure many also have questions about what it is and the benefits. Like you said, that's not all you're going to talk about today, but could you give us a brief overview about the different types of trusts and what the importance of the benefits of them are?
Sure. Well, you can look at this a couple of ways, and we'll get into this a little bit in a little bit more detail when we actually go through the formal program. But that's actually a good question to get started with because, and as I like to say, disability and simple are two words that don't go together, and I'm about to illustrate that. When it comes to categories of special needs trust, you can usually divide them into two parts. Okay. One is what's called the estate planning trust, and that's what we're going to mostly focus on today. And they're often referred to as third party trusts. Okay. And as we're going to see, and I want to really kind of flush this out a little bit more about what are some of the challenges here. But with those, there's a lot of latitude you can have with it. But as we're going to go through in these cases, because of the benefit laws, the trustee has sole and absolute discretion over every distribution, and the beneficiary has none, or virtually none. And we're going to talk about that and what are some of the problems here, because obviously our objective as advocates is to enable folks with disabilities to have as much control over their lives as they can. The other kind of trust, and it also often gets confused, is what's called the first party trust. Now, for attorneys, just to keep everybody confused, there's about a half a dozen names for the same thing. We call them D4A trust, we call them self-settled trust, we call them payback trust. But these are normally trusts where somebody gets an gets like a settlement or something like that, or an inheritance that goes directly to the person with the disability. The difference with those trusts is that there's a lot more formality in setting them up. And also there is a payback to Medi-Cal or Medicaid agencies for any Medi-Cal or Medicaid the person used during their entire lifetime from any of the assets that are left in the trust. Vastly different. Oftentimes these are for somebody who is Googling and asking, trying to figure things out. Oftentimes folks get confused about the rules about one or another. And this is where, once again, the more you can learn about these things, the better. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what are some of the types of information and documents, and what would you recommend that people get together to get started on their special needs trust journey?
Well, we're going to try to set this out as much as we can. I personally believe, and since we're probably going to be focused more on parents than anyone else, I think the more that you can learn before you sit in the attorney's office, the better. Okay. The problem as we're going to go through in a bit is that oftentimes planning is kind of mistaken for the document. Now, we do very lovely documents and we do very large documents. I know we have some clients watching and that kind of thing. And maybe I don't want my clients hearing this, but it's not the document that matters. In the end, it's who's going to manage this thing, And so oftentimes, I was just talking to one of my favorite fiduciaries. In fact, if she's watching right now, you are my favorite fiduciary here about this. But the problem with it, oftentimes plans are put together and they're like really impractical. and almost impossible to manage. So, I mean, I think the more education you can get, the better. The more you learn about trustee and support resources in your community. And then the other thing that I'm going to try to cover up here is that things are going to change. So whatever your plan is today, it's good for today. I will tell you for myself, I have been a disability advocate for 60 years minimum. Okay. When I was a young man, everybody lived in an institution. That's just how it was. There wasn't even a thought of something different, and then through the different phases of my life, I have seen so much change. The change in the last 60 years and where we are today, you could never have guessed this was going to happen. Where are we going to be in the next 60 years? And the answer is, I have no friggin' idea. A lot of that depends on advocacy of organizations like the ARC.
Thank you. That's really helpful information. So when you talk about getting as much information as you can and learning as much as you can before you get to the attorney's office, where do you recommend people get that information from?
Well,
Where do you find best resources?
I have a resource that I particularly like because I put it together. We have for instance, one that you might look at is, and we'll make sure that everybody has the link on this, but the Achieving Independence YouTube channel has hours and hours and hours of materials here, because once again, it kind of reflects the diversity of the disability community, right? I mean, it would be a lot easier if everybody had the same need, but that's just not how it works. And, good or bad, these folks are individuals. And, part of trying to do individual planning is a lot learning more about benefits and that kind of thing, trying to get as much education as possible. That's a good place to go for information. I know there's a number of books out there. We also have a program that maybe we'll highlight later called Keep the Lanterman Promise, which is basically it's a review of the Lanterman system and that kind of thing, because we want to make sure that if we're preserving benefits, it actually works within our system, our delivery system, and our delivery system in California is the Lanterman system. So,
well, I'm excited about, I know that you're going to offer up after this webinar, we'll be sending out an email like we always do. And I know that you've put together a wonderful resource sheet that will go out to everyone. And then also a beautiful slide presentation of lots of steps in developing your special needs trust. So thank you for that, Stephen. We're excited to get that out to everyone as well. You mentioned fiduciaries and the importance of that role. And so as we're coming to the, we've got about 10 more minutes to talk about a couple of different things. But one thing I don't want to miss out on is talking about choosing a fiduciary and what kinds of options there are for people when it comes to that.
Okay, and this will be the major focus of what I'm going to go through. By the way, as we go through this, the most common person that is named as the trustee of a special needs trust is usually the eldest daughter. Okay, I don't know why, but I'm just telling you. I mean, there are sons sometimes that are named, but it's usually the eldest daughter. But oftentimes it's a sibling, and you would think that that's the natural thing to do here. And I've seen cases where it works well. In fact, what I want to talk to you about is over the years, we've kind of learned that we don't want to disenfranchise the family, right? So siblings certainly are an important part of advocacy here, but I'm going to suggest a different role, okay, for family. And we're going to go through some models as we go through. I've got a handful of slides we're going to go through. With that, we have found that in many cases, using some sort of professional assistance here can be really useful. Now, traditionally, that has been the banks. Okay, when I first got started, a lot of the banks manage these things. We're seeing more banks getting out of this, and also oftentimes, and this isn't true for all, but they don't really give that personalized assistance. But there's this professional called the private professional fiduciary. And for those of you that are watching out there, if you're a person who's looking for a way to serve the disability community, or if you have a son or daughter that's looking for something worthwhile, here, as I like to say, for many families and siblings that of folks that are disabled, normally you either embrace it or you run as far away from it as you can, if you can, right? If you embrace it, here, a private professional fiduciary is a wonderful way to serve your community and the need. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but California is the leader when it comes to the private professional fiduciary. And this is an area that's growing very quickly. So these are basically individuals who are licensed. They're accountable to the licensing agency. I think sometimes to the extreme, but so be it. And for somebody, and I play two roles here, Felisa. I am an attorney. I'm also a trustee. And so it's kind of a schizophrenic situation. Sometimes I have to jump from one to the other. But as an attorney, trying to figure out who's going to carry out the plan and how can I put a plan together that will actually function, I will tell you the private professional fiduciary is our cornerstone, right? Here. Now, there is this other thing called the pooled trust. We're going to work that in too, and maybe what the difference is between the two of them and all that. But once again, for advocates out there, if you're a community leader, whatever, and I am here to help you, you need to get engaged with your local PFAC, Professional Fiduciary Association of California chapter. These are key advocates. These are key resources to really help achieve the real goal here, which is not just keeping somebody on a welfare program here. It's really working on that quality of life. And once again, I found, and by the way, they have as much to learn from us as we do from them, so we need to have a caring conversation with the private professional fiduciaries.
Okay. And so for the person that, may just choose to be their own fiduciary, what are your tips and suggestions for that person? Someone who maybe doesn't want to use a professional fiduciary.
My suggestion would be to be really flexible. So for instance, we do get those cases. Once again, if a client that says, I want my daughter to be the trustee, of course, my question is, what did she ever do to you? But but I want my daughter to take this over. Flexibility is the key. So, because like here would be the situation. We might have a situation where we're going to meet somebody named Kathy in a minute here. And let's say Kathy's sister wants to be the trustee, is fully equipped to do it. The plan is she's always going to live in Sacramento with where her sister is and all that. Well, guess what's likely to happen? What if she marries somebody in Washington, D.C. and moves across the country and that kind of thing? What if it's a situation where she just can't do it any longer? These are long-term games. So to actually build in the flexibility that if for some reason a family member is serving, that they can delegate it to somebody else, or even, if needed, to a private professional fiduciary or a pooled trust. And part of this, when we go through the different models, is we want to still keep the family members in control. And I'm not saying that every case needs to be run by a professional, but I am saying in many cases, the not hiring the professional, trying to save money, can often turn out to be the most expensive trust of all.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful for everyone. And then one of our last questions before we move on to our actual Q&A is going to be, so how does special needs trust, how does having one affect future planning? And are there particular advantages or protections to that?
How would it, once again, we need to get back to not mistaking the document for the plan, which I think a lot of people do. It's what I call the commoditization here of special needs planning, or the magic document syndrome here. is that, I mean, to word this a little different, I get this question all the time. When should I do my special needs trust? And the answer is you should do it at least the day before you die, right? If you know when you're going to die, well, you shouldn't do it the day before you die. You should do it. But the thing about it is a lot of the interest starts about the time the child is 18, because that's when we start thinking about capacity issues and benefits. But the real issue, the real need for this is that this trust becomes an alter ego for you. Here, it's basically carrying out your advocacy if you lose capacity or when you pass away. And things are going to change as time goes on. So you need to, as I think we're going to touch a little bit, we need the trust to be very clear about what are the overall objectives, but don't include a lot of detail. You can tie that with what's called a letter of intent, where you can get into the detail. And I will tell you, I get to live vicariously through my clients and my beneficiaries, and I see knowledge changing, I see attitudes changing, and that kind of thing. Everything changes, and we need to have the flexibility to change not only with the dynamics in the family, but also the dynamics in services here. So flexibility is the key.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm learning so much from you today. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. I want to make everyone clear. I think as you've been talking, you've been referring to a slide presentation that normally you would do. We're not going to do slides today because we don't have enough time for that in our caring conversation. But I want to assure everyone you will be getting a copy of that presentation in your email follow-up from us. So stay tuned for that. And that a lot of the things that Stephen's referenced today will be in that slide presentation. So we're going to wrap up right before our Q&A, Stephen. And I just wanted to ask, is there one last thing that you would want to say is the most important part of your conversation today that you want people to take away?
I think the most important thing with this is that these are not static documents. These are not static plans here. I think as far as this is concerned, is that you need to really look at the trust itself and start thinking through some of the problems. And we'll go back to one of the issues I had kind of identified. As it'll explain in the handout from the PowerPoint that folks will be able to get, a special needs trust is a form of a spendthrift trust. A spendthrift trust is a trust where the trustee has sole and absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none. Now, why is that? It's because traditionally with SSI law, and until recently, Medi-Cal, good example of things changing, you can't have more than $2,000 and stay eligible for those programs. So the problem has always been, and that's a ridiculous number, and the ARC has been trying to change that for decades here. But you know, the problem, so what the trust is set up to do is it can hold the assets, but since the beneficiary cannot control the assets, then it's not counted as a resource. So you can put any amount of assets in a trust. I actually once had a sports stadium in a special needs trust. You'd ask why, but well, maybe it's because we could here and that kind of thing, and all of that. But then we get into the problem, which is this: our goal as advocates should be working with persons with disabilities to enable them to have as much control over their lives as possible. You know, the whole community movement isn't just merely physically moving into the community, it's being part of the community. And as Ed Roberts said, if all we do is move people from big institutions into 6-bed group homes and keep them isolated, what did we really do? In fact, maybe we were better off with the institutions if that's the model. It's not just physically being in the community, it's being part of the community. So it's like, how can we set a balance? How can we set a trust that actually hears the voices of the beneficiaries we're working with, and not only helps them make sure that they have their needs taken care of, but to the degree possible, to help them have more control over their lives. This is where, if you look at some of the resources I provided, this is where using different tools can help. For instance, tying it to an ABLE account can give, more control, more ownership to the beneficiary. There's all sorts of ways of doing that, but it takes time, it takes thought, and it's something that's constantly evolving, and it's something we work with as well. So you really need to be really looking at your objectives and then trying to find something, a tool, a way that we can try to meet those objectives. And I have some families who very much want their disabled loved one to have as much control over their lives and the assets as possible. I have some folks, for good reason, who absolutely do not want them to be in control. Once again, these folks are individuals. And that situation may change as time goes on. So flexibility is the key, being clear about what your objectives are, but also having a knowledgeable management team that understands how to meet those objectives. Like, for instance, a tool that wasn't even in existence, half a decade ago, a thing called the Trilling card has become the cornerstone of special needs planning here, and has enabled folks to be able to have more control over their lives and not be taken care of, right? These are not objects of our pity or compassion or whatever. We're talking about overseeing very precious funds for a person with a disability, oftentimes very vulnerable members of our society. And how can we work on that balance, And once again, that's an important part of planning. And it isn't easy.
Yeah, no, it's always about the balance, right? It's a very, as a mom to a disabled daughter who is now, an adult, and we are going through all of these different areas and trying to navigate. And that's one thing I say to myself all the time is, where do I find the balance? Because there's so many balls that are juggling in the air all the time. Thank you again for being here, Stephen, and we're going to move right into Q&A. So if you guys have questions, please type them in the Q&A now, and we will begin our Q&A session. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. If you would like to use the ASL interpreter to ask your question, please raise your hand and request video access in the Q&A. Okay, so we have Faith, who is asking, I hope you can discuss if it is possible to use self-determination for possible trustee management of a special needs trust.
We're really exploring this at the Golden State Pooled Trust here, and maybe a little later we'll go through what the heck is a pooled trust here. But we are actually exploring this both with the Golden State Pooled Trust and a couple of work groups I work with, working with individual trusts and private fiduciaries here. And we actually have our executive director of the Golden State Pooled Trust, Mary Ebel, is a big fan of self-determination here. And so basically what we're looking at is that, to try to meet our objectives, if we went the self-determination route, we have one pot of money to cover what the self-determination is supposed to cover. And then we would have another pot of money, which would be in the pooled trust. I mean, once again, as far as I'm concerned, two pots of money work fine. The two of them should be able to work together. Now, what would the special needs trust do? I don't think self-determination is a substitute for planning. I think that's a mistake. I think it can be a cornerstone. I think when it works, it's a magic thing here and all of that. I think you can coordinate between the two. It's a relatively new concept here. I mean, and I know it's been around for a number of years, but we're actually seeing it get a little bit more traction. And I think the two can work together. Now, here would be the issue. And I think this is where the ARC can help us. And this program called the KTLP program, one of the things you're going to get in the handout is an initiative we put together with the ARC called the Keep the Lanham Promise program. It's kind of based on a one of the things we call a Daleism, which is if your trustee or fiduciary doesn't know the difference between an IPP and an SUV, how effective are they going to be? Well, part of this is with the self-determination and looking at all these different options is one for families to understand this, but the other one is for our professionals, the attorneys, the fiduciaries, the financial advisors, and all that to understand that. And so what we put together is a crash course here in the Lanterman system, which we will be expanding on all the basics of planning, things you need to know about the system. Because once again, how can you do a plan to support a person with a developmental disability in California to supplement services if you don't understand the Lanterman system, that kind of thing? The point of the whole thing is that to make this work, I think we need to have more awareness. We need to have more education, not just with the families, but also with professionals who are doing these plans to be aware of this and help, counsel families about how to use these different tools to meet their objectives.
Thank you. We have Mary asking, can a special needs financial advisor be a trustee for the trust?
Normally not, but some do. I would make this suggestion, okay, is that the financial advisor, who is an important part of the planning process, I think in most cases, it's a mistake for them to serve as the trustee. I think they should serve with a trustee. Now, you're going to see kind of a pitch here, is that many private fiduciaries will work with your financial advisor, right? So we're going to come back to private professional fiduciaries and that kind of thing. And I'm going to indulge myself for just a minute. I'm going to share a screen here just while we're talking a little bit about private fiduciaries. Hopefully, and I'll take this down in a minute here, but a lot of private professionals will work with the financial advisor. And that has a couple of good things with it, because one thing is a good financial advisor is going to know more than what are your stock choices and that kind of thing. They should know what your objectives are here. And that can be some pretty valuable information. So oftentimes when I have a plan and there is a financial advisor who is key in the advocacy, I will pair them with a private professional fiduciary. By the way, I'm not getting anything back from the private professional fiduciaries. I should, don't you think? Here, I'm certainly pitching them today. What I have on the screen is here. Maybe we'll leave it just for a few minutes. Here is the screen for PFAC, which is the organization that represents them, and you'll notice that their website is pfac-pro.org. Okay, so
Thank you.
yes.
Okay, so next we have, what are the checks and balances on the fiduciary? How do I know they won't overspend, for example, or worst case, take money or overpay themselves?
Well, that is a good question. Well, let me back up something. Here, let me show you a model. If I can quit fumbling around. Let me show you a model that I like to use. Okay, and it's not the only model. With a lot of materials I'm going to leave you. This is my preferred way to do this, because let's just look at it this way. Did I mention that the trustee has sole and absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none? I mean, anybody see something problematic about that? The thing with it is that we need some sort of a checks and balance when we're doing this. The way I like to set this up, and this is a model that's worked for years, is I like to have a trustee. It could be a corporate trustee. It could be a private professional fiduciary. It could even be a pooled trust, here, who is going to manage the trust. With that, they would be overseen by an advisory committee. Now, this oftentimes gets confusing because if it's one person, we call them a trust protector. If it's a group of people, we call it an advisory committee. They have the same function. Their function is to oversee the management of the trust, not to be involved on a day-to-day basis here, but to be to oversee the trust. We normally, and I use a trust that I actually wrote. It's called the Wealth Council Trust, and there's lots of offices that use this across the country, and this is very common. These are included in these trusts. The advisory committee provides the oversight. They My preference is they do an annual distribution plan. So it's kind of like an IPP. They sit down, and by the way, we can include the beneficiary in this discussion. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's everything right with that. We can figure out what the objectives are and what we're going to do. What is it going to cost here? And also something really important here is that if we spend at this rate, when are we going to run out of money? Right? Because, that kind of thing. The other thing the advisory committee can do is hire and fire the trustee. And I think you must always be able to do that for any number of reasons. For one thing is we're dealing with a very vulnerable person. So the beneficiary cannot fire the trustee. We need a surrogate to be able to do that. This is a very good place for family members and that kind of thing. It gives them an active role, but they're not involved in the day-to-day management of the trust. Oftentimes, you can tie that in with what's called the professional care manager. Okay. And these are professional social workers that oftentimes will go out and visit and because let's go back to this. One thing about community living, especially when we're talking with developmental disabilities, keeping in mind that these are individuals. And like I say, if you've met one person with a developmental disability, we know the rest of it, right? But that being said, there's a lot of these folks that are very vulnerable. And one of the reasons I even got involved in doing this work and became a civil rights lawyer is the amount of abuse in the community is very high. Right. And so you must always be vigilant for folks who are not able to advocate for themselves. And even if they are able to advocate for themselves, to be able to, make sure that their voice is heard here. And if you don't have family that's there on a regular basis checking on the beneficiary, you can hire a professional care manager to come out and do that, do safety checks, there's a group down in San Diego where there's a former caseworker from a regional center that serves as a care manager. In fact, she'd make an excellent presenter sometime for you. And they could come and advise on, how to be more effective in the IPP and that kind of thing. And all the different things that need to go. This model, which is my favorite model, gives us that checks and balance, and it does have the flexibility to do what needs to be done.
Thank you. That's great. And like I said, everyone will get this slide presentation in their follow-up email for attending today. Is the pool trust only for California residents?
Well, there are pool trusts and there are pool trusts. Okay. I manage the Golden State Pool Trust, which I feel is the finest trust in California, but I'm the trustee of this, so it's my job to believe that. In fact, are we? We are not the only game in town. There's probably about 8 pool trusts in California, and I'll highlight a couple of them. The Golden State Pool Trust serves only persons in California. We are strictly California. The JLA Trust in Los Angeles, a very fine trust here, serves primarily in the Los Angeles area. Okay, there are other trusts that serve regionally, some were saved statewide, and then there are trusts that serve nationwide. And so part of it is when you're looking at the possibility of a pooled trust here, part of it is you need to look at the situation. For instance, if you're likely to stay in California, California, GSPT would be a good choice. But the fact is, there's a couple of things. We live in a very mobile society. I know people move around. One of our biggest exports in California is Californians. So we can't be sure that somebody's always going to stay in our lovely state, and they may move. That may affect how you want to set up your trust and who you might want to choose as the trustee. So, for instance, we get a lot of military families where they don't know where they're going to be. And so there's a number of national pool trusts. One of my favorite trusts um, uh, is CTT, and unfortunately, I know the acronym here, but and once again, with anybody that's ever looking for a trustee, they're always free to contact me, and I'll do my best to connect you up. But that might have something to do with the choice of who the trustee is. If I can mention a little bit about pool trust, since we're on the subject, traditionally the way a pool trust works is what you do is you sign a joinder agreement, set up an account, and you don't even have to do your own special needs trust. My problem with that model, and I am the trustee of a pool trust, is I believe that flexibility and portability are incredibly important, right? So rather than use a joinder agreement, if there's a substantial amount of funds, and you can define substantial, but I would say if it's something over 100,000, it's hard to do this by numbers. My preference is to do an individual trust, um, um, which delegates the management to the pool in a very similar way to the model that we saw before. Now, what are the pros and cons of a pool trust? For instance, with the Golden State Pool Trust, we are a call center. We are never going to see the beneficiary. It's not going to happen, right? And if we have somebody who really needs that hands-on, that's going to have me lean a lot closer to using a private professional fiduciary, because these folks generally work in the community the beneficiary lives, and they actually go out and see the beneficiary. I have to work through natural supports, care managers, and that kind of thing to really, or the beneficiary themselves, to be able to know what the beneficiary's needs are, and you need to establish it that way. I think one of the advantages of the pool trust is, depending on the pool trust, is we do have a lot of resources. We do tend to be very good at making distributions without losing benefits and that kind of thing. But everything has a pro and con. Here's actually some language that's going to be here that I like to put in the trust. And let's say you were naming the Golden State Pool Trust, or whatever pool trust you're working with. And most pool trusts will manage individual trusts. And I'll mention this. The advantage of the individual trust, especially with the kind of language we're talking about here, is like, let's say somebody joins the Golden State Pool Trust and we manage your trust and everything's going well, but there's a better trust, or there's a better option that's going to do a better job for less money. Why would you not want that, right? If you look at this language, part of what this does is this gives the advisory committee or a trust protector the ability to hire and fire the trustee based on whatever the need is here at the time. Because once again, consider this. Let's say you set up Felicia, let's make this personal. How old is your daughter?
She's 23, almost 24.
Okay, 23 or 24. Don't listen to the next part. You're not going to like this. Let's say, God forbid, you get the trust set up and you're in San Francisco and you get hit by a bus. That's usually when people say, I'm worried about dying. They're worried about getting hit by a bus. And in San Francisco, that's very possible. So let's say at this point, you have passed away. Okay, you get the trust all set up. Your daughter is supposed to live until she's 87 years old. Okay. We're talking about 5+ decades, right? Can you tell me what the system is going to be like, and what her needs are going to be, and what the challenges and opportunities are going to be for the next 50 years? And if you can, that would be amazing, right? We got to be flexible, even in the choice of trustees. And this is part of advocacy. We're going to see options change as time goes on. And we want to make sure that we can adjust to whatever that is. You should never give any profession, be it an attorney, a fiduciary, a pool trust, a financial advisor, let's just go down the list. You should never give them a job that they're not accountable for. If the future trustees of the Golden State Pool Trust do not provide the type of services that our beneficiaries deserve, you should pull your business and go somewhere else. There needs to be accountability, whether we're talking about pool trusts, regional centers, whatever we're doing. Accountability is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, so much to think about. So a lot of people are asking how often they should update or revisit their special needs trusts.
We have something um, that we try to include, and it's in some of our materials. And I could do the normal attorney thing. It depends, but this is my feeling, and this is what I usually tell my clients. Pick a date. Could be your child's birthday. Could be that I have somebody who does it the day he signed the trust because he says he'll always remember signing that big check. If that does it for you, that's terrific. Pick a date. I think once a year, you should open this up, take a look at this, and ask yourself, does this make sense? Does whoever I named as the trustee make sense, right? Um, uh, do we have the right advisors? Is there something that changed? Laws have just changed, right? The Medi-Cal laws have changed dramatically here, and that kind of thing. Then, once again, I think that probably at least once a decade, you might check back with the attorney. But I don't think normally, if you have a well-written trust, it's going to have the flexibility to deal with most changes and that sort of thing. And what most people are usually looking at changing is who's the trustee, and maybe update your letters of intent on that kind of thing to make sure that your objectives are in line, and they're going to change. Also, for folks that keep these letters of intent, I like people to think of them as a journal because, and I've had some parents who've come back and thanked me for this, is that the letter of intent you might write today is going to be vastly different than the one you're going to write 10 years from now, which is going to be vastly different than 10 years from there. And you can actually watch a progress in your thinking because it's a diary of your wants and needs and hopes for your disabled loved one.
Yeah, and all of those things, like you said, those are continually changing. So it's an evolving document, right? It's a living document that's changing over time.
It is.
Yeah,
Although a good trust, and this is why you don't want to get deep into the woods with the trust itself, because you want to keep this thing flexible. On the other hand, that's where the letter of intent comes in, because you do want to tell the trustee, this is what I want you to accomplish.
right. So, what is the difference between a private professional fiduciary and the pooled trust? I think you've
Well,
already kind of
the,
answered that.
the private professional fiduciary, just to answer that, um, uh, is an individual who serves as a fiduciary, a trustee, and they do a lot more than special needs trust. We're just a subset of a larger group. Um, uh, they're scattered all over the state, um, and they're very accountable. A pool trust is traditionally is kind of like a cross between a 401k and a special needs trust when you use it in the traditional sense. Here, um, when you use it in the traditional sense, um, with a joinder agreement, basically what you get is an account, and then that's managed, and then it operates like any other trust. What I prefer for clients is, if they're looking at using a pooled trust, is to set up an individual trust and have the pooled trust manage that for one reason. So if for some reason we need to move it, then we can move everything. If everything is in the pooled trust, then let's say, for instance, you wanted to move it, even if the trust allowed for that, you'd have to cash out the assets and transfer them. It's just not efficient. So I like the best of both worlds. And the other thing is, as you see in this language that I put up here, is that I think that you need to be open to as many possibilities as possible. Even in a case like this, let's say, Felisa, in your situation, that you want a family member to be the trustee, and that's that. Well, there may be situations where they do need to delegate and that sort of thing here. And so I like to make sure there's as many options as possible. And I believe it's in this language. I'm not in a position to read it here, but oftentimes when a family member opts to, instead of not manage but to delegate, then they step into the role of the trust protector, so they still have that oversight, and they can even take it back later. Flexibility is the key.
Okay. Let's see. We have, what is the maximum assets a disabled person can have under the California Medi-Cal laws? I know it used to be 2,000. It still is, isn't it?
Nope, that
Oh,
changed. Oh,
oh,
it
it
changed
has.
dramatically. Oh my
Oh,
goodness,
okay.
goodness, goodness.
Okay,
So,
good. I'm
and
glad
I
that I
think this
asked
is
that question.
important, and this is going to illustrate something. Okay. Normally, when you look at why you do a special needs trust, if you ask anybody, why do you do a special needs trust? Why do you do it? To preserve public benefits, right? Felisa, have you ever known somebody actually on SSI?
Yeah.
Would you like to trade places with them?
Um,
I wouldn't. I absolutely wouldn't.
yeah, no,
No
it's
question.
it's a
You know,
very
it's
difficult,
like
yeah.
many things in disability. It's a necessary evil. The whole $2,000 thing, the whole thing about and by the way, I'm about one of the most liberal people you can imagine, but I'm not going to sound that way in just a minute. Here, the government telling me what I can spend my money on and what I can't spend my money on.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
It's frustrating. Okay. Here. Well, we're in a situation now where with Medi-Cal, we have no longer have a resource test, right? So where it's been $2,000 for years and years and years. If you're getting Medi-Cal and you're not on SSI, SSI has not changed. And you can get your Medi-Cal based on getting SSI, but in many cases, we have a lot of families where they're like if you have IHSS, Medi-Cal is absolutely essential, right? And they may be on a program called Childhood Disability Benefits, which is not SSI. Right? So the thing with it is those laws are changing. They did not change the income rules, and we can't even begin to get into the complexity of that. But it's actually manageable. There may be a lot of situations where if your only objective is to preserve eligibility for public benefits, there's probably some of the families listening to right now here that their main objective is to preserve the Medi-Cal, and it may be there's ways of doing it without the trust. But that's not really the reason for the special needs trust in my mind. The special needs trust for me is a management system to basically take these resources that we have and apply them for the quality of life for a specific individual. So a lot of times when I talk to families, they'll say, well, do I still need to do the special needs trust? And my question often is, how wild are you about turning this money over to Junior here to manage without a lot of oversight? And in most cases, the answer is, yeah, Junior has a lot of things, but Junior needs some level of protection, right? Right. And so oftentimes it's trying to find that level of protection. It should never have been totally focused on benefits. Benefits is just a tool. That's all it is. Sometimes that tool can be more harmful than good here. And I've had folks that have gone to extremes to preserve a small amount of SSI to preserve their Medi-Cal, and that's no longer necessary, right? So um, laws are changing. I don't, and that sort of thing. But I think the primary thing that a good special needs trust should be is it should be that advocacy tool. It should also have checks and balance. It should work to enable the beneficiary to have as much control of their life as possible, keeping in mind the situation, and benefits should never have been the primary objective.
Thank you. We have also, Felice is asking, we have a special needs trust included in the family revocable living trust. Do I need to pull it out or do a special needs by itself?
What? Oh, hold on. Hold on. I need to, that was my timer. So part of this is art. My preference is an individual trust. That is my preference. Why is that my preference here? One is by having an individual trust, if people want to make contributions to it, it makes it a lot easier. I think there's a lot of reasons that in our office, in our law firm, everybody gets an individual trust. Does that mean that folks should go out there if what you have is a sub trust in your living trust or whatever and change it? Not necessarily. I think you need to think about it. The if I think there's many, you have to look at your situation. I wouldn't just blindly go out and change it unless there's a good reason. So I'm not sure I answered that as well as I should. Once again, in my office, nobody gets a sub trust, not even a thing. If you ask for it, I would. If you insisted on it, I would charge you the same amount of money anyway. So there you go. But is it being in a sub trust? I think you have to look at the situation. Are there other people likely to contribute to it? That sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take one more question and then let's see, we still have quite a few though. Let's see. Are all third-party special needs trusts considered to be a qualified disability trust for tax purposes?
Yes. Now, what's a qualified disability? And here's the thing.
There are no simple answers, are there?
How many times have we heard that special needs trusts are evil because they pay the highest tax rate around here, and so they're just really evil. I have had one trust in 30 years pay that high tax rate. It's called the compressed tax rate, and because of time here, I won't go into this, but what a qualified disability trust currently it's a $5,000 exemption that comes with the trust. Now the beneficiary has to be under the age of 65 when the trust was established. Not hard in most cases, and funded, right? Here it has to be irrevocable. It can't be what's called a grantor trust to the parent. Once again, we won't go through that. You want to know what that is, talk to your CPA, right? But most trusts, it is not a grantor trust to the parent and that kind of thing. Also, a special needs trust could be an excellent tax planning tool. In fact, next week with the Golden State Pooled Trust, we will be doing a class with Peter Wall from TrueLink Financial about how to use a third-party special needs trust as a tax planning tool, especially when we're talking about using retirement plans. I have zeroed out multi-million-dollar retirement plans in special needs trusts. And if you do the right planning, and if you have your team all work together here, and this would be kind of a good example here. If we have the financial advisor who's working with the trustee and the CPA and everybody, you can actually create a plan that will minimize taxes, and special needs trusts make great tax planning tools.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. I think that is a good place for us to end today. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's question today, but I will tell you this. Stephen has put together a beautiful package that will come out in an email to you that will have lots of answers to questions in general. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
And
Thank
Felicia,
you.
can I throw in just one last thing before we go?
Sure.
For folks that are watching this, okay, once again, the ARC of California and the Golden State Pool Trust have put together a program which is open to anybody. It will be in your materials if you ask for them, called the Keep the Landerman Promise series, which is a crash course for professionals. It comes with MCLE credit and that kind of thing. If you're working with an attorney or a fiduciary or a professional, which you think that they are doing a good job and could better serve your community, I would urge you to have them look at this this series that we put together so they can better understand our system, so that when they do their planning or their trust administration and that kind of thing, they understand how the Lanterman system works, things like self-determination and that kind of thing, and how we can make all these things work together. Part of what we need to do as advocates is that we need to insist on more from our professionals, and we need the folks that are doing this work, especially the attorneys, to be more than document sellers. We need for them to be counselors at law. And once again, my question always is, if your attorney or fiduciary doesn't understand the Lanterman system, how could they possibly supplement those services with knowledge? How would they possibly identify situations where the system has gone off course? So with that, I would really urge folks to look at this. And if you have a professional you're working with, have them look at this program, consider taking the program. And part of what we will be doing is we will be listing folks who've taken the program for consumers to look at, that at least the trustee or the attorney took the class. We don't know how bright they are, but at least they took the class, and they're starting with a base of knowledge, not just selling a document. And I'm going to do my best to be quiet now.
Thank you so much for everything you shared today. And thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.